and welcome to Structured Creativity, the podcast where we explore the space between process and play. I'm Najma, but you can call me Nudge, and I have the pleasure of Laura Donohue joining me in the virtual studio today. Welcome, Laura! Could you please introduce yourself?
Yay! Thank you so much, Naj. I'm Laura Donohue. I'm a user researcher at Sutherland Labs, where I head up the games research division and do all sorts of other fun research there. I have a background in psychology and a master's in social work, and previously worked as a looked after children social worker in South London. You'll find that lots of people in kind of the UX discipline come from all sorts of different multidisciplinary backgrounds. So that's a lot of fun. And I've been a user researcher for the past 5 years and have loved every minute of it.
That's amazing. I'd love to dig into all of that. All of that sounds really interesting. And I think it just strengthens my point that people really benefit from having diverse and varied backgrounds, and it really nurtures their creativity. But yeah, there's time to get into all of that. But my first question to you is, did you always want to be what you're doing right now?
So I've always been interested in people. People and human behavior has always fascinated me. It's just, I don't know, I was always kind of a people watcher, always interested in what people were doing and why. I took my first psychology class in high school and was like, wow, there's a whole discipline for learning about why people act the way they do. Yay. So that's why I kind of went into psychology. And then, was kind of trying to decide, do I want to, do academic research or become a practitioner? And so I decided to kind of go through that social work route. But while doing that, actually, I got my degree at New York University Silver School of Social Work in New York, obviously. And as part of that, they have a tech school. And I, just being a total nerd, was like, I have extra credits. I should make the most out of this really expensive tuition that I'm paying and audit a class. Yeah. So I audited a ideation and prototyping class. And that's when I kind of started learning about user research. I ended up helping out with some playtesting, actually, for a friend who was developing a game. It's called Breakup Squad is what it's called. It's by Cat Small and the former Brooklyn Gamery. It's been toured all over the world, including the Victorian Albert Museum, which is insane. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Absolutely, look up Cat Small. She is the best human ever. But anyways, this is my very long way of saying that user research has always kind of been in the back of my mind. Yeah. And after doing social work for a few years, I kind of decided that, I wanted to change, feeling a little burnt out, was still interested in working with people. And UX research fulfilled, all those needs. And yeah, been doing it ever since. Here we are,
heading up a games research department, which is one of the coolest job titles ever. No big deal. I'll just head up games research. Not a problem. Yeah, it's just, the still thing. Yeah, that's me. I love that. So I kind of feel okay, what does a marketer and UX researcher have in common? As it turns out, quite a lot, because I feel I was also very interested in the inner workings of people. I'm a big film fanatic, and I loved observing, emotional complexities and things like that. And I got into marketing because there was a lot of, how do you speak to people and how do you communicate to them? And that requires a lot of having to know a lot about people. So I took social psychology, and that was the most interesting thing ever to me in university. And so I feel on some level, I've always wanted to understand people, and that kind of turned into communicating with people and marketing and communicating with people right now. So it's very cool. We've come at it from 2 different directions. Incredible. So could you tell me a little bit more about what a UX researcher does?
Yeah, absolutely. And interesting you bring it up, because there is some overlap between market research and UX research. We both look at people, we both look at behavior. I would say the difference is And this is very overly simplistic. And obviously, there's a lot more complexity that goes into both. But for
Mhm.
me, for marketing, it's do people want to buy it versus do people want to use it? And
Mhm.
that is what I think the biggest difference is between like a market researcher and a user researcher.
Yeah.
Certainly, some of the recommendations, and we might look at like marketing copy, for example,
Mhm.
or features or messaging that comes from marketing.
Mhm.
However, what we really pay attention to is how people are interacting with a product, an experience, a game, and seeing, what those interactions are. Are they expected, unexpected? Are they enjoying that experience or
Mhm.
not?
Mhm.
Especially like with a game, enjoyment can mean so many different things
Oh
that
yes,
it's
yes.
really the job of, a combination of the UX team and the dev team and, designers and whatnot to really determine like, okay, like how are we classifying, or defining like what fun means, like what kind of
Mhm.
fun, what kind of
Yeah.
memorable experiences should people get out of playing our game? And so we kind of help define that and make
Yeah.
sure that, that's being realized.
That's so interesting. I think there's definitely that overlap in terms of like in marketing as well. We think a lot about like classifying human behavior, which is the weirdest thing ever. Because what does engagement mean? Well, is it likes? Is it comments? Is it amount of time someone spends on a page or, at some point in the game? Like, what does it mean? So you have to try and like come up with this like taxonomy as best as possible of like defining what it is you're looking for. And yeah, that sounds really similar to what you guys do. I think interestingly, like as a trend, I think certainly in the last 10 years, I feel like there's been way more emphasis on marketing folding in a lot of like UX stuff as well. Because coming from, well, you ask any marketer, their philosophy is going to be different, but my philosophy is about, well, what are the problems people are trying to solve, and like what jobs do they need to get done, and then figuring out, well, is this offering of ours like going to be of any use to them? Like, do they
Mm.
care at all? So there's a lot of like UX stuff folded into that, which I think is so interesting, and I love digging into that. So yeah, that brings me to the overlap between structure and creativity. So you are in a unique place where you're empowering others to do their best creative work, like we touched on just briefly. So can you talk about like what that looks like?
That's really nice to hear that actually, because I feel like a lot of people look at UX researchers as kind of a bit of a wet blanket sometimes. Because, and I do notice that oftentimes after a project, we, tend to kind of focus on, what is, deemed as kind of like negative or detract in like air
Mm,
quotes, negative detractors, and things of that kind that really, researchers are just taking like user feedback and then telling designers like do better, finger waving,
right, right.
but that's just not the case at all.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like, okay, yes, we have to report on the negative, but we're also
Yes.
reporting on the positive.
So I think the way that UX research empowers designers and creativity in general is
Mm-hmm.
that we are helping them, you know, and we are helping them to ensure that the
Mm-hmm.
vision and the, designs that they're making are having the impact that is intended. So, for
Mm, yeah.
example, I've seen all sorts of there's been a lot more talks at like the game developers conference about like playtesting and things like that, and how
Mm,
powerful it's been to watch people like level designers watch players like go through their levels and
yes.
just get so totally lost and just don't understand like where they're going or what they're doing, and you can see like the
Mm.
life draining from their eyes, and obviously that is like not something you want to do as someone who's like designing fun and designing creatively.
Yeah.
And so you're able to take, those experiences, that evidence, and use that to enhance your creativity and
Mm-hmm.
make something, and try something new and different. And then seeing that end result of like, okay, yes, like people are like getting in and they're getting to the cool thing that like I want
Yeah.
them to get to. And user research helps a lot with that. We're able to kind of define and like help them structure these play tests and ask them like, what are some of the top, like what's keeping you up at night? What questions do you have that, you
Mm.
really want to answer to move on and progress like through, this level design or narrative or game mechanics,
Yeah.
so that, you can be confident that what you're making is landing with an audience.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, one thing I find as well is that um one thing I'm learning more and more about game dev is actually creativity blooms within constraints, and so like essentially you're giving people like, okay, here's some guardrails. Like I like talking a lot about guardrails, and here's things to avoid, and here's things to really lean into. I can only imagine like a designer is going to like just glom onto that and be like, okay, yes, now we know the rules of this game.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. And I think, having constraints can
Mhm.
also be actually freeing in a way. Because I think
Yeah.
if the scope is too large and the sandbox is too big,
Hmm.
at certain points of development, then you can just kind of get lost and like go down these
Yeah.
rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And then, especially if there's a timeline and deadlines that you have to meet, then
Hmm.
it can feel quite defeating, because then you don't
Yeah.
really know, I don't know if the direction I'm going is the right one. I
Hmm.
have like a gut feeling, and, that's definitely something to be relied on. I'm
Hmm.
not a level designer, or a designer in general. Don't ask me to try to design a website. It's going to turn out real bad. But, I'm there to kind of almost be like an advocate for players or users, and interpret, their feedback in a way that's like constructive and going to provide like, what are the next steps that they should
Mm.
consider when,
Yeah.
implementing these findings.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, it's like that saying, "How long is a piece of string?" You have to make sure that you're asking questions so that, like they're not like totally open ended and there's just choice exhaustion galore. Like constraints can be very free. Well, that brings me to the next question, which is, what part exactly does user data play in games? Because we're talking a lot about collecting feedback, but how important is it, and how is it used in your area of work?
Well, I'm a little biased as a user researcher, because I'm going to say it is extremely important. But
Yeah.
I think also within like the kind of the last 10 years, the games industry has recognized how important user data is,
Mm-hmm.
whether if that's analytics or surveys or qualitative, observing playtesting, concept testing, etc. These are concepts that have been used, throughout multiple, within the product industry for
Yeah.
decades.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that I think now games like being more creative, is starting to kind of catch up and see like, oh, this is actually going to help us speed up game development and save time and money,
Mm-hmm.
because we're making, you know, clear evidence based decisions, about which way we want to go, with
Mm-hmm.
designing or level, or what kind of game mechanics like make sense in this type of genre of a game, for
Yeah.
example. And so, in kind of looking at the development cycle of a game, user research can play a role, throughout all of those different touch points of game development, from
Mm-hmm.
early kind of concept testing to, play testing different levels of like iterations of the
Mm-hmm.
game, different parts of the game. Of course, you can keep kind of play testing later on as you progress later into development. It can cost more, time and money to make
Mm-hmm.
changes. So I'd say if I had to choose like what part is most important, probably like kind of early in the middle of development, I think is really where user research can really help you.
Yes, that's really interesting to hear. So, I think also where like games are getting more expensive to make, and also people are taking like bigger swings as well with game development. So I imagine there's like, oh, like, you know, there's an element of de-risking that needs to happen, certainly. um like, from your, I mean, could you just outline really briefly what it looks like when you are kind of planning out a strategy for like UX research throughout a game? Like, what are the things that you think about, and what are the questions that you ask the team?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of depends. So as someone that works for an agency, we kind of sit outside of the team
Mm-hmm.
for like studios and things like that. But it
Mm-hmm.
does look pretty similar, whether if you're, kind of agency or client side,
Mm-hmm.
wherein, either someone from, it could be a producer, director of player experiences or design, things like that, might come to you as a researcher and say like, hey, like we're interested in doing some playtesting. This is where we're at, these are the kind of questions that we have. And that kind of like level of like articulation of like what they're looking for can really
Mm-hmm.
vary. And so as a
Mm.
user researcher, you're there to kind of help sometimes guide them and help them come up with those kinds of questions and objectives. Because sometimes
Yeah.
it's just like, I don't know, is our game fun? And it's like, well,
Define.
okay, that's a really big question, and we
Yeah.
need to examine that from a few different angles. So
Yeah.
let's like take a look at our, like game design pillars and where we're at right now in terms of development, what's keeping you up at night, and, help them kind of define, that strategy,
Mm-hmm.
and whether if that's going to be like multiple play tests or concept testing or a one off,
Mm-hmm.
those are the kinds of things. And then from there, you kind of start to define, okay, like what are our objectives? Who do we want to recruit
Mm.
to conduct this research with?
Sure.
Is it
Yeah.
people within like your expected player base, or maybe you want to look slightly outside of that? Is there another audience that you're looking to like tap into? Um,
Right.
so a researcher will help you with all of those things and develop like a recruitment criteria to help you understand like, okay, like these are the kinds of people you want to recruit because,
Mm-hmm.
they are likely to play games of the genre that you're developing. And here are kind of like some edge cases where there might be some overlap. So seeing
Mm-hmm.
like if you want to get in touch with these folks as well, and age, demographics, gaming behaviors and experiences, things like that.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then there are all sorts of other things like how you're going to collect data and structure the playtests and whatnot.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of planning that needs to one does not just simply playtest.
No, no, one does not. There's lots to think about. Well, yeah, thank you for, yeah, giving us a glimpse into your world. It sounds very layered, it sounds very complex. The part that I love hearing about though is this idea of like coaching people through like being able to articulate exactly what it is they're looking for. Because surprise, surprise, and marketing also have to do that quite a lot. Simply market this thing. Um
Go make
okay.
people buy the thing. Okay,
Yeah.
I need to know
Okay.
a little bit more about what the thing and how it's valuable.
Yeah, and who and which people and what are you trying to achieve as a business,
All
and
of them.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
all the people.
yeah, all of those people. They'll surely have this use for this incredibly like weirdly niche product that so yeah, I love digging into articulating, I guess, giving people the vocabulary to uh be able to like describe their own thing as well is always really interesting to me, because like you said, define fun, like classify fun. The one thing I love thinking about is my one of my comfort games, I totally classify this as a cozy game, is Frostpunk, which is a very stressful like city management thing. So, but I just love it because like I feel like, oh, I'm really locked in. I'm in like a state of flow. It's just like taking a task off. I feel like the most productive I ever am in that game. So like that, my idea of fun is like not somebody else's idea of fun as well. So
Totally.
incredibly interesting.
Absolutely. I think like my biggest example is and I guess I might be kind of, I mean, all sorts of people play all sorts of different games.
Mm-hmm.
But, I might be in the mood. And sometimes what I might find fun is playing Elden Ring and dying like 30 times,
Right. Yeah.
and some people find that fun somehow, including myself. Whereas other times, I just want to play like, a deck building game where I can really take my time and strategize and not have to worry about, counting frames and like rolling at the
Yes.
precise time.
Iframes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fun can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful segue into my next question, which is around player personas. So I feel like we're dipping a little bit into that, but could you tell me a little bit about player personas and what are they? How would you define them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like in terms of like kind of persona development in general, people would need to be really careful and about how those are structured. But I'll get into that in a minute. But essentially, a persona is kind of this like somewhere between, like this built up representation of a collection of individuals that's kind of embodied in this like single entity. And the reason why I say people need to be careful with it is that when people typically build personas, they're basing it off of a product that they're making. And they're probably, they're making this product because they want to. And it probably serves, some sort of need that they have. And thus, sometimes their own identity can leak into the persona.
Sure.
And so, it's based off of assumptions, their personal worldview, and it can be a real slippery slope from, looking at this and saying, okay, yeah, this is definitely like my core audience, and I play these games and I'm making a game just like these games. So this is exactly like who they are. And so that's why, like, sometimes I'm, kind of 50-50 on personas. I've definitely seen very well crafted personas that are based in data that's been collected. And then, not for games research, but for another project, we actually validated those personas by going out and interviewing people. This was in the restaurant industry. And we spoke to different kinds of like restaurant owners and managers about how they like manage their business and the software that they use. And that was a really actually great way and a bit of a kind of a personal turning point, because I have to say, like, I've never been like a huge fan of personas, but that was a really responsible way to do it, because they did some, digging on their own and then validated it with research. And, we actually ended up making some tweaks to them based on the data that we collected. And so, again, like a really great tool and also a great kind of shorthand reference point for, developers, designers who don't have time to conduct like 50 different interviews to make sure that,
not in the indie industry, no.
No, definitely not. And and even in AAA, like you can't have everyone going out and doing interviews. Actually, very funny. I don't know if you saw, but the Baldur's Gate 3 was winning so many awards and sending out so many developers that like it actually slowed down development for like fixing bugs and things like that.
Right, I see, because like this person's over there accepting this award and this person's over there.
Yeah.
So
well, it's the same with doing research, it's like you can't always go out and ask all the things all the time. So personas are really helpful for that. You just have to make sure you validate them, with like real people and data.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's like qualitative versus quantitative, or qual versus quant. Yeah, a healthy mix. And like you say, like a very responsible view of viewing personas. Is it normal for personas to change throughout a game's development? Have you seen that happen?
So I think there could definitely be trends.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned like you found a game to be like cozy, and like
Mm-hmm.
the term cozy has been used to describe like so as kind of like a mega genre.
Yeah.
And all sorts
Yeah.
of games that some people might consider this cozy or that cozy, and so I could see something like that, like
Mm-hmm.
actually um creating like some kind of like shift in persona building, where you
Ah,
might
that's
actually
interesting.
be able to market your game or include
Mm.
mechanics in your game that might be like cozy adjacent, or be interpreted as such. And so I
Mm-hmm.
do see personas as kind of like living, breathing digital people
Yeah.
that can certainly change, and that's okay.
Mm.
If it is like an absolutely significant change, then you might need to go back and be like, how did we actually make these, and were we actually right all along? But yeah,
Mm.
they're based off of living, breathing people, and we're
Mm.
changing all the time because
Yeah.
we're complicated like that. But overall, as long as you have like kind of a good like finger on the pulse, and
Mm-hmm.
and definitely trust like your gut feeling, your personal experiences do matter.
Mm.
That I think player personas can evolve, but not in like a super dramatic way.
Yeah, yeah. This is the other thing that overlaps really quite a lot with marketing, because we also make use of personas as well, and they are a fictional representation of a person, or like people, if they're like clear personas, like different personas that use a product or an offering. But you're very right. I think it's the same in marketing as well. You have to build them in such a way that is logical and isn't stereotyping people as
Mm-hmm.
well. It's
Mm-hmm.
like only women use this product. Like, okay, like not necessarily though. Like, but I think when we're talking about personas in terms of like, well, this is the kind of person that likes these are the media, and this person tends to get their information from here and here, that opens up some really interesting questions, like, oh, okay, so how can we communicate to this person in a way that, like, we are where they are, and not making them go where they're not, because
Mm.
that doesn't make any sense for
And I
us, and
love
probably
that.
more expensive. Yeah.
I love that persona building
Mm-hmm.
leads to curiosity and questions. And I
Yeah.
think that's actually a really great way to look at personas, is that it's not necessarily like, okay, this is the answer and we need to
Mm-hmm.
stick to that. It is a
Mm-hmm.
place that, where, you're constantly questioning and being curious and
Mm-hmm.
growing your knowledge to make sure that like, you're incorporating like other, people's identity and
Yeah,
experiences.
their desires, their wants, yeah, all of that. And I find games so interesting as an offering because there is this very technical element to them. And they are, yes, absolutely a digital product that people like use. And there's a lot of like software and tech know-how that needs to go into like deconstructing that. But there's also this idea of games as like something that people identify with. Like, I am a Baldur's Gate fan. I am a Resident Evil fan. This sort of like this thing of like, yeah, the hard stuff, but also this identity stuff as well. And incorporating that into persona, I think, is so juicy and like interesting, and sparks a lot of curiosity for me as well. I actually hold these marketing workshops, and one thing I love to do is like try and get people to forget everything they think they know about the people that are playing their game. Like, totally forget it. What we'll do is we'll take a look at your game's unique features or attributes, and then we're going to talk about the benefit of those attributes, and then we're going to have a think about, well, who are those benefits valuable to. Now, a lot of the time that matches with like what they think their target audience is, but a lot of the time not really. You can come up with some really interesting findings of like, well, actually, there's this one part of the game that that could probably speak to like a different audience that you didn't expect. Things like that.
That's so cool. And that reminds me a lot of something we do a lot in research, which is like called card sorting, where you have
Ooh.
like a predetermined list of, it could be like features, for example. Yeah. And then you have like either like predefined categories of needs, or maybe you like organize them into different groups and then name those groups and, who you think they're going to be most valuable for. And to help kind of prioritize as well, how important and how much impact these different groups can have on players or people or product development. It's
Okay.
a fantastic exercise.
Yeah. Wow, look at that. Look at us meeting somewhere in the Venn diagram. Marketer and UX
Cross
researcher.
professional learning.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna make that jingle right now. So this is so juicy to think about. So I guess for indie devs, that's a whole other thing, because like all of these really interesting creative big swings are being taken in indie, this space to get weird. And so how do you think indie devs can make good use of player personas and just some of the stuff that we've been talking about?
Yeah, and the indie space is great for that. Keep making super weird games. It makes
Make
me
it
so
weird.
happy. Make it so
Yeah.
weird. And I think a way that indies can use player personas is, again, it works as a nice kind of shortcut and reference point to see, like, a reminder of like who you're making this for, what they're looking for, what are their kind of expectations from your super weird game. And as well as a reminder to actually go out and find those people to test your game. And to try, there's all sorts of internal testing, that you can do. You can play test your own game. You can have other, maybe, people who aren't developers, like, someone sitting in, marketing, for example, who doesn't usually participate in like the game development process, and having, those folks test it out. But at the end of the day, like the best player data is going to come from people who aren't developers, or at the very least people who aren't working on your game. And that's going to make sure that as well, kind of a check-in for your player personas, like, okay, if we still like got this right, is there something we're missing? Like, is there an opportunity as well? Like that actually, like, wow, like these people who love to make books, actually also love to bake pie. And our bookbinding game doesn't have baking in it. Maybe we need to add that, and then we could like appeal to the bookbinders and the bakers.
Gosh, I am so there if that game is being made. Count me in. That sounds wonderful.
Shout out in the comments if you're making a game about bookbinding and baking. I'm here for it.
And baking, totally. That really brings to mind, I think, like having a defined player persona can be very helpful, because I think you can really think about that as a person, like, would this person really understand this or like this? Like, what are their feelings or attitudes about this thing? It's all about sparking more questions rather than being like a full stop. So I wanted to shout out my friend Nicholas O'Brien, who's making this very weird game called Bundle of Joy, and it's about being a new parent, and it reflects his experience of being a new parent over COVID as well.
Oh my god, amazing!
Yeah, and so like it's a bunch of mini games like taking care of baby, but like there's a stress meter because you're a new parent, and so like I think like he's got this really clear vision, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a bit, but he's also got this very clear idea of like who the persona is when we talked about it as well. Like, and his point of view was really interesting, is that, well, yeah, sure, I mean, I'm sure this could speak to new parents and like people who have recently been through that experience as well, or maybe went through that experience a long time ago. But also, like, I wanted to speak to people who like don't understand what it's like to be a new parent, and maybe give them some empathy about like how difficult and scary that experience is. And it's like, oh, that's a wonderful way to approach building out your weird game.
Totally. Then it starts getting
Yeah,
into that kind of like educational advocacy kind of space as well.
yeah.
Love that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So yeah, I've said the V word, vision. So yeah, we've talked a lot about collecting data from players and how devs can use that information, but there's always this tension, right? So how can game devs balance their creative vision with that player feedback?
So I think while player feedback can be very valuable, it's also very powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
with great power comes great responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And choosing the right times to share that, and also ensuring that like the story that you're telling with that data is going to positively impact the team, because I think oftentimes, teams can, read these reports and things like that. And it's just like, this is, like on a traffic light on scale from 1 to 3, like in a red, like,
Sure.
like 3, 3, 3, like bad, bad, bad. And that can be like really defeating and de energizing. And
Mm-hmm.
so, as a user researcher or whoever is, collecting this data, making sure that the story that they're telling is one like of growth and improvement, and one that says goes back to what that like creative like design vision is of the studio, and saying
Mm-hmm.
that this is what's going to help us realize that vision,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's also a suggestion and an interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not being prescriptive with the data that we're sharing. We're just,
Mm-hmm.
interpreting what we saw and observed,
Mm-hmm.
and why, it's important, and what kind of potential impact it can have on
Mm-hmm.
like a player's interaction with
Mm-hmm.
your, with what you've created.
Yeah. Yeah, I think equally as well, there's something really interesting about um oh, totally going the other direction, because like, oh, players like this thing, but if it's not aligned with your creative vision, then you're like, we don't want it, cut it out. There's something really powerful about that, and requires like a really good sense of the game vision, what you're trying to say with the game, and what your pillars are as well. Because I think taking on too much player feedback can essentially just be designed by committee, and nobody wants that. It just becomes a mess. So like staying very true to your vision, I think, is really important. Again, like, to bring it back to marketing, in my workshops, the thing that I like to ask people is the negative version of all of the questions. So for example, who's your target audience? Okay, who is not your target audience? So if people can keep that very clear with that creative vision, I think that helps a lot as well. Like, what are we saying with this game, and what are we absolutely not saying with this game as well?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why storytelling is actually a really important part of being a
Mm-hmm.
user researcher, because
Mm-hmm.
we are structuring, our data and our reports in a way that, is tailored to the studio or the client that we're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And remains, productive, and integrates, what their kind of like, goals, KPIs, or creative vision is with, what we saw and what we've, kind of interpreted. And it's
Mm-hmm.
important to know that, simply because like a player struggled with something doesn't mean you
Mm-hmm.
have to remove it completely.
Yeah.
It also
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to make it, again, quote, easier. What does
Yes.
easier mean?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily mean like making the AI stand still so that you can keep punching it in the face.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, people can actually find that quite boring then, and then it's like too easy and like not engaging.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was something to do with like the combination of buttons that like combos that people have to use
Uh,
is too complicated, or maybe it's the positioning, or the way that the character was rigged. Like there's so many different things, um,
mm-hmm.
And also, maybe we notice from a pattern that, it's coming from people who we recruited, that don't quite play like this genre of game.
Right.
And then you
Yeah.
get to make the decision of like, well, do we want to really try to like, reach out to that audience, or maybe we do just want to keep it for, again, like Elden Ring, where people enjoy dying like 50
Yeah,
times
they
in a
like the
row.
difficulty. Yeah. Yeah, totally. They love the punishment. Yeah.
They love it so
They
much
love
for
it.
some reason. I'm included. I don't know why. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this idea of friction, adding it, removing it. And sometimes counterintuitively there are places where you want to add friction because that's not something that you want people to be able to do easily. Whereas in some, people are always thinking about, oh, how can we remove this block or remove this friction? But like a lot, like sometimes there's a smart way of like adding friction to for certain purposes as well. So yeah, that's another one to think about. So yeah, let's talk about pragmatism in game dev. So yeah, they solving that creative tension of what your vision is, being able to say no to some player feedback, but also there's obviously the other element, which is we're making games to sell them as a product at the end of the day. Is that how does that come into play for you as a UX researcher to like is that even your problem? Like that kind of thing as well.
Oh, I'd say big
Yeah.
time it's our problem because
Yeah.
I think also some of the difficulty, especially in kind of like qualitative user research, is that it can be tricky to communicate those like quick wins with
Sure.
clients or stakeholders. We're not necessarily tweaking, search engine optimization, and then
Yeah.
a week later you're able to see like, oh yeah, web traffic has gone up by 30%.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Quite difficult to like draw those kind of direct conclusions, though I would say, not impossible. But it is something that is in the back of the mind of a user researcher because, we should really only be doing research when it's necessary and when it's going to be helpful. So never would I like come across, like a team and say like, okay, you're going to implement that change. We need to do research on that. Like research on all the things like that is not pragmatic and that's going to slow things down. So we're constantly trying to find different ways of like, when's the right time to do it? When is it going to have the most impact? Especially if you're looking to hire, like a team like us or work with a freelancer, they should really be working with you to make sure that like you're going to get like all the data, like, or at least like as much data as you can get that is going to help you, make the decisions you need to make to, get over that development hurdle, expedite development, and to get, the best kind of like results from your game. We don't do research for the sake of it. Well, I mean, I would love to because then I'm like, yay, I get to talk to people and learn about things. But it's always with some concrete goal or objectives in mind. Like we are doing this for a reason, and it is overall to improve your game or improve employee experience or to make it easier for people to use your product, during like high stress situations or something like that.
Imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah. So right. Like, so yeah, that's what I think. Yeah. That pragmatism comes in.
Yeah. I mean, totally. I think it comes down to like design thinking, there's clearly a problem or an objective to solve for. And that's what we should be expending effort and time and resources into, not just like, hey, I wonder if this thing is cool. I wonder if we could do this. As fun as it would be to go down that rabbit hole, ultimately it's about bringing it back to what are we actually trying to achieve here. And I think this is why you should make producers your best friend. And I'm not saying this as like someone who loves producing, but like generally they'll keep you on the straight and narrow. They're going to be the people who are like, no, come on, like this stuff we got to do. There's a budget we've got to keep within. So you absolutely need those people on your side. I mean, who would you say you work most closely with actually, as a UX researcher in an agency, like on client side? Who are you normally liaising with?
Yeah. So when I did previously work client side, it was typically with the product team. It was a very small team, though. I worked. It was kind of like helped kind of develop like the UX research wing there. And we also sat in on conversations, like stand up with developers to kind of hear like how things were progressing, if there was going to be a potential need for user research, et cetera. And then kind of coming agency side, although this could also happen in, much larger studios or companies as well, is that user researchers work with everybody. We work with marketing, producers, developers, designers, marketers, literally anybody who, we or they think like should, be involved in like helping to plan this research because it's going to touch, like whatever arm they're in charge of. Those are the people that we talk to. Quality assurance as well. And just like literally everyone. We're almost like, I like to kind of think we're kind of like this like multidisciplinary conduit where we're trying to speak, all these different languages and wear these different hats to make sure that, whatever research we're doing is going to help, whoever like the stakeholders are.
Yeah. And that actually, that's like a wonderful mental model in that like you're the voice of the player, really. And so you're kind of like this ambassador and you're like talking to all of these different departments and trying to like take all of these diverse perspectives in because that's what good data collection is about, right? Like being able to see all of these different perspectives. Because if you only ever collect data, say from marketing, you're going to have a very specific view, like bias in your data. Whereas if you're talking to QA, you're talking to marketing, you're talking to, all of these different departments, you're gonna create this very like holistic picture. So yeah, that's very cool to hear.
Absolutely. And also they're the ones who, your stakeholders are typically, maybe not all of them, but at least one or two of them are commissioning the research. So you really want to make sure that they feel, included and understood and that, it's clearly defined, like, okay, like this at the end of the day, like this is what we should be delivering for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes down to storytelling that you were saying earlier as well. Yeah. Nobody wants to look, I mean, not a lot of people really want to look at like a spreadsheet full of data because they'll be like, what?
Nah, and people don't got time for that. Developers got to develop, designers got to design, and
they gotta do what they do best. Yeah, exactly.
No.
You gotta reduce, distill, give it to them in a way that they understand and makes sense for them. And it's all about enabling other people's creativity, which is to bring us back around. Okay, so we're going to, sadly, I feel like I could talk to you all day about this stuff, but I've got to let you go at some point. So we're going to dip into some of the fun stuff here. I've got to ask you, what is your favorite game?
Oh, good Lord, it changes all the time.
It's a big question.
I mean, I'm going to feel like so a little basic and probably just say like Baldur's Gate 3, which was...
It's a great choice.
I mean, I think a lot of people thought it was a great choice, so that's pretty good. Before that, though, and I really do, again, those like action role playing, RP, like turn-based strategy games, like that is like, oh, yes, give me all of that. Because before that, I was playing Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, which is another, which is based off of the Pathfinder system, which is also fantastic. And if you like into like nitty gritty numbers and like
Mhm.
like there are so many more classes and subclasses and spells and things like that,
Oh,
has a
okay.
fantastic story. So yeah, I would say like that kind of like genre, like oh, that's my thing.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm getting a sense of like what the player persona for Laura would look like as well. But what's really interesting is that, the people are complex and they like different things. So we've established you love playing Elden Ring as well.
Yeah.
Are there any wild cards in your like favorite games that you think are like
100%.
unexpected? Yeah.
There's actually, I haven't played it in a long time, but
Yeah.
I have at least a couple hundred hours in a hunting simulator game called
Oh,
called The Hunter Call of the Wild,
that's
which is
interesting.
first of all just like gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
You're a hunter and you're walking around and
Mm-hmm.
I'm really sorry for like the vegetarians and vegans out there, but you're going out and like shooting animals and things like that. And I mean, it's just really beautiful. The scenery, like the graphics are incredible. And it's
Mm-hmm.
nice that, I'm not going out and doing it in real life. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that if it's like fulfilling like a necessity, like, you need
Yeah.
to hunt that pheasant to like feed your
Sh-
family or deer or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've like talked to people about that and they're like, wow, you're like not the target demographic. Cause like a lot of people who play like are, well, they're also American and I'm American and they're big time
Mm-mm.
hunters, like, in real life.
So
And I'm
interesting.
like, a woman living in England and I guess American, and like don't hunt, but I like love this game. So yeah, sometimes you just get real wild cards.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I feel like I have a few for myself. Well, I mean, we touched on Frostpunk, which is like so different to like all of the other games I play, but I've definitely clocked like more than 100 hours in it, so I love it. So yeah, I love asking people about their wildcard games. But that being said, all this talk about digital, all this talk about games. How do you unplug? All right, how do you touch grass?
Well, kind of literally. I like to do a lot of bird photography.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, I love going out. I have like a camera with a long lens and just like walk around and go find some birds. It's actually my
Gorgeous.
way of cheating of still kind of playing a video game because I'm still using like kind of like a digital camera. And it's like Pokemon, like gotta
Oh
catch them
yes,
all.
Poke. That's true. You're like, oh my god, gotta catch that one. Click.
A yellow hammer. I haven't seen that yet. Click. you know. So yeah, that's like one of my biggest ways of doing that. I like going to different kind of I live really close to some fields, so I like go out
Mm-hmm.
there and sit and watch nature go by. I also like to get in my car and drive to like new locations as well. And either walk around or like just if you just sit and are quiet, you like nature will come to you, and you'll start
Mm-hmm.
to notice things that you don't normally notice in like your everyday busy life. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like one of the main things I do to go like
Yeah.
literally touch some grass.
That's so great. Wow. Yeah, I'm lucky enough to live in Salisbury, and it's we have these like wonderful nature walks nearby, and I also love just kind of sitting down on a bench and just kind of looking at it all, especially someone who's come from Singapore, which is like all buildings, totally metropolitan in that way. And, so like coming here to the UK was really so different, especially in a place like Salisbury where like it's not built up at all because of the historic nature of the buildings and, Salisbury Cathedral as well. So yeah, I love just being in nature. And I think like I get some of my best ideas just from like walking around, just unplugging from stuff, and then I'll suddenly come across something like randomly while out and about walking, being like, oh, this is like the solution to the problem I've been stewing on for
Mm.
like a week. Do you find that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I mean, it's like you just having, turning off your brain
Mm,
and just being present in the moment can actually,
yeah.
I think, really help, with maybe problems that you've been trying to solve for ages, and then you're finally like, oh wow, yeah, I could just do that. Or you can also just like keep your brain turned off, and that's
Yeah.
totally fine, and practice some mindfulness. And it's I think especially in like today's day and age where it's like constantly like we have to be producing all of the time.
Mm.
Just remember to go outside, sit on a bench, and just like chill.
Take it all in. Yeah. Yeah. That's such an important thing as well, It's definitely something I'm working on personally where I don't have to be doing stuff all the time. Like I can take a break and have a sandwich and just
My worth isn't
chill.
always directly tied to what I produce.
Whoa.
Wow. It's a work in
Whoa.
progress.
Yeah, always. But yeah, an incredibly important lesson to just yeah, something to be mindful of. Okay, so I've got like my fun selection here, which is you can take your pick of either of the questions below, which is you've been tasked with organizing a party, so or you get to design a theme park. So which one have you gone for?
Okay. So I'm actually controversial take, not a huge fan of theme parks. Rides
Oh,
scare me.
oh
So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna choose. I do love organizing a party, so that's absolutely what
Yes.
I would go for.
Okay, amazing. So what is the party for that you're organizing? What are you planning the
Okay,
party for? Yeah.
so we're just gonna go straight for Halloween,
Love it. Love it.
because you
Yeah.
get to dress up, you get to eat candy. It's like like
Yeah.
cosplaying is cool for everybody. So it's
Hmm.
just like, yes, oh my god, like this is my absolutely favorite holiday and like party to plan for. And so if I just had like an unlimited budget, like
Hmm.
I would invite all my friends and like
Hmm.
fly them in from like all
Hmm.
over the world, and have just like this amazing venue space that like had kind of like different areas. So you know a place to go get punch, and then like a photo, kind
Hmm.
of like a wall where you can you know pose with your friends and things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
um
Taking full advantage of the costumes, of
yeah,
course. You gotta take
totally.
pictures. Yeah.
Gotta get pictures of all that.
Yeah.
And then also having like maybe a separate room or something like that, like where people can also just like decompress and chill,
Oh, I love that.
so
Yeah.
that because not everyone is like you have your extroverts, your introverts, and I mean
Hmm.
everybody sometimes just needs a moment to be like, ooh, okay, there's like a lot going on, a lot of excitement, I just
Hmm.
need like some peace and quiet. And
Yeah.
like if another person goes in there, like they'll just know like okay, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, I'm not going to interrupt you, and like we're all just gonna like chill out, and then once we leave we can go back to like partying hard. um
That's the conscientious party planner right there. Putting
a
aside a party plan. Yeah, putting aside a quiet like party room. But actually, what's really interesting is that I feel like some of the best conversations I've had is like in a party situation, but it's like outside of the party. Where you step outside for like a couple
Yes.
of minutes with someone. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because music is just like way too loud. I would
Yeah.
also try to find a way, like, I would make the music the exact right volume it needs to be, or like have some
Mm-hmm.
kind of, like areas or something where, like, if you want the loud music, like, you can go closer to it. If you want a conversation, you can move away from it, but like still kind of feel a part of it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Cause
Yeah.
yeah, I do find myself like all the time, even like in restaurants, just like being like, and
Oh.
this thing I really
Yeah.
want to talk
How are
about.
you doing?
Ah,
Yeah.
and then I'm like hoarse
Way too loud.
afterwards, and like
Yeah.
not about that. So like the music is like a perfect volume. There could be like a karaoke room also that's like
Yeah.
soundproof. So if you want to be like super mega loud, like go there. Or if you want to have like
Yeah.
super, in-depth conversations, like you can go somewhere else or go outside and and touch
Um,
grass. There'll be some grass there.
I love that. I love that. So I'm imagining like the venue, is it sort of like a one of those like country house, like those country manor type situations, and there's like different wings people can be in. Cause yeah, what's your take on like decor? Is it like the tackier the better? What are your?
Oh, you got all sorts of pumpkins and bats, hung up.
You gotta go big, yeah. It's like a 12-foot skeleton.
You got a fog
somewhere.
machine. You got the spider webs. There's a dancing skeleton.
There's like plastic like gravestones as well.
100%. And then
right.
the names for them are like a pun or something.
Oh yes.
I can't think of any clever puns right now, but they would be there. And someone would write them. And there'd be like, a fog machine and all sorts of like, funny games like bobbing for apples.
Oh my gosh.
And things like that. But
that sounds like so much fun.
Yeah. But then again, conscientious party planner. If you mess up your makeup, like, there are bathrooms with like,
obviously
very well illuminated mirrors and like makeup and things like that you can use to like touch up.
I love to hear it. If you ever do this party sometime, I demand an invite.
100%.
So yeah, that brings us to the end, sadly. And like I said, I feel like I could have talked all day with you about user data, player feedback, creative vision. But for now, we'll maybe save that for a part 2. But in the meantime, where can people find you?
Oh my God. First of all, I would love a part 2 because there are so many things I still like, especially like contextual, like gaming as well. Like, especially when we're talking about like, what's your kind of like, out there like game that wouldn't typically fit your profile. I think like a lot of forms of entertainment have kind of moved from like people don't just listen to like country music, for example. They listen to different types of music depending on what they're doing. Anyways, I'm sorry. You just have to listen to me ramble another time somewhere else. But right. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's like the only thing I can handle. I can't do all the other ones. Yeah. But I'm if you just look up Laura Donohue, or I think I'm at LJ Donohue on LinkedIn. So find me there.
Amazing. And is there anything you'd like to promote? Any projects that you're working on that you love people to check out?
Not at the moment. I mean, listen to the podcast. I've recorded a few episodes.
Yes, you
with
are
the
indeed
Game Dev Local podcast.
A fellow podcast host. Yes, absolutely.
So you can find me there. And feel free to just ask me questions about user research and player research, and very happy to do that. If you ever want to come down and say hi, I'm in the office semi-regularly in Covent Garden, so feel free to stop by at Sutherland Labs. And
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been the seed of a very bigger conversation I feel like we're going to have over several parts, hopefully, about research, about people, about players. But for now, we'll say goodbye. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Nash. Bye, guys.
Bye.